Welcome to the L36 podcast, where global adventures, transformative stories, and cultural insights come together, expanding our perspectives and inspiring us to grow. I'm your host, Stephen Pearce, and today we're speaking with Michael McRay, a gifted storyteller, narrative coach, and TEDx speaker whose personal journey of self-curiosity has empowered countless individuals to heal from trauma.
I was running a retreat, and the guy that I work with, he walked in. He's like, "Hey, this person had a lot of stuff come up during lunch, and I need you to help him." And I look over, and this person's just standing there sobbing. And one of the first things he said was like, "I'm just so caught in this loop in my head." And so as soon as he said loop, I was like, "Great, start walking in a circle."
Michael passionately advocates for a deeper exploration of our stories, guiding us to understand, reshape, and reclaim our narratives for greater emotional resilience and authenticity. Well, here we are. It's nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I'm excited to speak to you because I am a self-professed storyteller. So I think we have something. We have an endless amount of discussion that can occur. So
Totally.
I'm really excited to speak to you. But I was just listening to your TEDx talk in Nashville. I think that was right.
Yeah, that's right.
That was
Yeah.
amazing, and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, appreciate that.
You just even that one person that needs to hear these kinds of things and how it transforms their lives. So.
Totally.
Deeply respect you for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. I had
Yeah.
a lot of older men come up to me after that one.
Oh, really?
For those that I'm assuming most people listening won't have seen it. So the short of it is it's a talk about how self-curiosity has helped me heal from trauma. And I talked about a couple of particular trauma and significant traumatic incidences of my life, and attempted suicide when I was 20, and having dealt with kind of a few years of chronic assaults in high school.
Yeah.
And kind of those types of conversations are not ones we often hear men talking about.
Right.
And so, so afterwards out in the hallways, and I did like a TED breakout storytelling workshop right afterwards. So a lot of people came to that right after the talk. And but it was really meaningful to have these older men just like in tears saying like, "God, I want to be able to talk about my stuff like that. Like I want to be able to tell these stories with that, not necessarily with I'll say it this way, like whenever I talk about storytelling publicly, because this is what I do for a lot of my work.
Yeah.
I typically encourage people when you're telling stories publicly to tell from your scars and not your wounds, which is not a phrase I originated, but one that I found very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Tell stories from your scars, not your wounds, because I don't ever want people in the audience to feel like I'm bleeding over them and that I need a paramedic, right? An emotional paramedic.
Yeah.
I want them to feel like they have the benefit of getting to hear the wisdom that comes from really wrestling with the stuff in our stories, and then being able to say, and here's what has come from that. And so, so I appreciate you listening to it. And it's been part of my hope was to be part of the ongoing attempts to normalize men talking about difficult things that happen without having to perform some false sense of masculinity, of being like, well, nothing gets to us. And I'm like, what nonsense? Of course it does.
Right.
It's okay to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. I mean, just look at the suicide rates of men, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Totally.
So I mean, and I as you were telling this, we had created a little film about my story, and most people on this podcast know it, but suicidal ideation was a part of my story that spun me off to say, okay, where else can I go besides there? And this kind of returning to a childhood dream, which was being a storyteller. I mean, for me, it's always been filmmaking. And always wanted to be a filmmaker. And plus, for some reason, I wanted to be a stunt double in films. I can remember my dad would go to these.
That's the real death wish. Are you kidding?
My dad would go to this chiropractor all the time, and I would take the cards. He has a card in the front office, and I would write my own stunt double card, and I would give it out to people. And like, here, I'm going to be a stunt double one day in films. And then as I got older, I was like, okay, maybe not a stunt double, but I want to make films. And then, it's like, as I got a little older, I started to get into this kind of more philosophical approach of saying, My God, a lot of the stuff that the way that I interpret the media and films and the glorification of violence and sexualization and all that kind of stuff, it's like, my God, this is so far off from reality. Like, what is actual the reality of living the human experience? And that's
Mm,
why I became passionate about filmmaking, specifically educational entertainment, and really looking at what's the truth in the story. What are we
mm,
really learning from these from this type of entertainment? And that's why I decided, I'd go back. I went through all my training as a physician, and then I went back and decided I'd start making films, and that ended up being Love Evolved, which is on PBS right now, which is my story
mm,
that's out
mm.
there. But so when I hear a fellow storyteller saying, "Look, there's a different way to tell your story. There, you can learn from your story." I just say, "Yes, please teach us. We want to know more."
Yeah, it's been a passion for a long time. I mean, I've been drawn to stories since I was a kid for a variety of reasons. But as I got into college, especially, I started feeling this real draw toward piecework in some way. I
Mm,
was like, I found like a blog I wrote maybe my sophomore year of college about this like desire to want to do like nonviolent direct action and conflict resolution stuff and some of that was from some of my Christian upbringing as a kid
hmm.
and understanding like having a belief around that part of the call of Christians was to be peacemakers, and
Yeah, yeah,
that's not currently is still an animating part of kind of what drives me, but it was a very formative part for sure. And then I grew up also going to Israel and Palestine. So my granddad was an archaeologist and a New Testament professor, and so my dad lived in Jerusalem as a kid, and he wanted us to have a similar experience. So like my first trip overseas was when I was 11 and went to Jerusalem. And I've now been 14 times to Palestine and Israel
wow,
and have taught classes on understanding the conflict. I've done peace work there. And there was this powerful draw to want to work in peace building, partly because of having grown up going to a conflict zone. Um, but also, I began to realize this is what I was kind of naming in the TEDx talk was like realizing that because of these things that happened to me, particularly these assaults that happened in high school, um, I think there was something in me really wanting to make something purposeful from that pain. And I think many of us, if not all of us, move through life with a sometimes loud and sometimes quiet desire to heal the stuff within us and to do that by tending to that same pain out in the world.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think I've had a draw toward ideas of reconciliation or of conflict transformation because I've been trying to resolve the conflicts within me of these different parts of myself that felt like they were out of line. And I tend to believe that our greatest possibility of purpose comes from our deepest experiences of pain.
hmm,
And so, um, yeah, so my draw to story work, and this is what I do in my coaching business, Becoming Restoried, is helping people reconcile to their life stories of recognizing we're all telling ourselves a story about who we are. And for many of us, it often ends up being a pretty limiting story. I talk about four that I think most people get stuck in, which is the self-doubt story that says I'm not enough, the victim story that says I'm not worthy, the avoidance story that says everything's fine, please don't convince me otherwise, or the self-defeating story that says hi, I'm the problem, it's me. And so we have these guiding narratives that form and fuel so much that happens in our lives, and we get stuck in these stories. And so what does it look like to restory ourselves, to be able to unlearn those stories in service of updating kind of the operating system that we're in?
yeah,
We all have these kind of story OSs, these story operating systems that
yeah,
are forming everything. It's like sometimes they get out of date. Like you can't run, iOS 18 on an iPhone 2. It's like you got
right,
to update the operating system. You got to update the phone. So it's just like we occasionally we're trying to function, in our 30s and our 40s and our 50s with guiding narratives that we took on when we were 12, or
yeah,
when we were 14.
right,
And it's like,
right,
well, we got to update them.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. No, that's so interesting. So when you take people through this, what does that typically look like for an individual that comes to you?
Yeah, there are two major approaches that I'll take. One is a group cohort online. There's
Yeah.
the cohort approach is a pretty effective one. There's a lot of stats that show, like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like if you enroll in an online course and just to do it on your own, like
Yeah.
they have like a 3% completion rate.
I'm
It's
that
abysmal.
3% completion rate. I can't tell you how
Meaning
many.
you're the one that actually does it,
Yeah.
or yeah,
No, oh, 3%. No, I'm like the failure rate. I'm like, this is like 3%.
totally.
Yeah. Oh, there's only 3% that complete. Yeah. Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
3% of people who enroll in an online course will ever actually complete it.
Yeah. Yeah. Then how many other
However,
97%?
when those are done in cohorts, the completion rate is like 96%.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so the experience of moving through something with a group of people, having that shared experience, makes a huge difference. So, so I have a 12-week cohort that I do, and walking through understanding who we are as the characters in our own story. What are the desires and values that we have as the characters in our story? Where does our sense of purpose come from? What's the origin story of that? I have a process called the dig site that is looking at like a specific experience of pain that's formed a negative story about ourselves, and how do we dig down and see the layers of meaning that we've given around that. I use a lot of old stories like folk tales and myths. So I have two
Oh,
folk
cool.
tales that I tell at the beginning of every cohort. One's called The Handless Maiden, which is a Germanic story, and one's called The Lindworm, which is a Norwegian folk tale. And they offer just these incredible ways into seeing ourselves freshly. There's this Russian literary term the word is ustranenie, and it means otherworldization. And so sometimes the idea is like that in order to see an environment that we're familiar with more clearly, we often have to put the context of that into an entirely unfamiliar scene. And because then we have sort of similar dynamics in this other world, we're suddenly able to see with new wisdom at this thing that we're used to. It's like partly why sci-fi can be so effective, even as social critique, right? Because
Yeah.
you can be like, well, let's take this thing, but we'll put it in outer space. And so a lot of our defenses that we would build up around approaching a subject are suddenly gone, because now we're talking about Mars, we're not talking about Earth,
Yeah.
but then we're like, wait a minute, and we're recognizing, oh, like that is really crappy the way that they're treating these people in this story, but isn't that the same way, like isn't that what we're doing to these people? And it just starts to, it starts to do its work, because we've taken the familiar and put it in the unfamiliar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always love to start with these old stories, and what people are drawn to in these old stories often is the doorway to allow them to begin to rewire their subconscious, where they're like, oh man, I just really resonate with that prince that was sent into exile. Like I just keep thinking about that guy. It's just like, yeah. So like, what part of yourself do you think has been sent into exile?
Yeah.
And what would it
Yeah.
look like to call it back? So we just use the story as a way to get in. So I do that in the 12-week cohort. And then I also do this thing called experiential intensives. So that's where I meet people in person for a full day, 2 days, 3 days, and create an experiential process for them. Experiential is all around kind of creating an image of the thing that we're working on. So it's like, say someone says, I can't figure out why I can't forgive my mom, and so it's like we might end up doing a psychodramatic thing where we create some kind of image of their mother in the room and then let them have a conversation with their mother.
Yeah.
Or one person I remember was saying, hey, I really want to reflect on like the story. She was about to retire. She's like, I want to reflect on the story of my working life, and like what difference did I make? So I had like 100 feet of rope. So I had her take the rope and create the actual timeline of her entire working life. And we took like, index cards, and we gave chapter headings to the valleys and the peaks of each of those places. And on those
Mhm.
cards, she would write down like one lesson that she learned and one lesson that she left. And so it's like being able to make this image so that you can externalize what's internal and
Yeah.
actually be able to interact with it and do something. So it's very creative. It's very expressive, often movement based, and it's extraordinary what can get done. Like I've often, both as a client of experiential and as a practitioner, have seen that like in a day, maybe two, but often in a day, you can get done what might take 3 to 6 months of therapy,
Yeah.
because it's just the ability to create with your hands a process, and to actually get to interact with the thing, you can go exponentially deeper. than just having a conversation on the couch,
Yeah. Yeah. I always look
So,
for those practices that, um, I don't know if I want to use the word speed up in public, but I mean, that's essentially what I yearn for. And what's the trick, what's the trick? And I,
yeah.
uh, I can remember, I mean, I spent years in meditation and it didn't work for me. And yet I was out there talking to, neuroscientists about how it does work. And I was looking at the papers and I know it works. And you talk about a group cohort. I spent some time at a spiritual psychology course or class or program out in California, and the thing that shattered everything, all the anxiety that I just could not ever get rid of to save my life, was group sharing. Group sharing,
Mm.
like but like you're in about 150 people and you stand up and you share your deepest, darkest secret in front of them. My God. I mean, talk about a heart pounding, I want to die. This is beyond public speaking uh, kind of thing.
That's your version of stunt work now.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just-
And I didn't recognize it at first, but then I was like, oh my God, I could actually talk to my wife without, I mean, imagine having an anxiety attack. I guess some people might say, well, that's just a normal day for me, but an anxiety attack with your partner, because you can't, and you realize you can't have a conversation with anybody because you're having an anxiety attack. Everywhere you go, a conversation is a threat.
Mhm.
I mean, the quality of life in that moment for me was pretty poor. And then I did this. I had this one moment, and then COVID happened, and I was like, oh well, now we're all online. And I actually found that having the conversation through the computer, it still triggered the same fight or
Mm.
flight response,
Yeah,
but there's a little bit of a shield of protection, and
sure.
I just started to use that. So this group, I would just share in front of the group, and I started just ad nauseum. And finally, I think they started to stop picking my little virtual hand going up because they're like, "Yeah, he's going to share
Started
again."
muting you.
Exactly. But I figured it out. So these but yeah, but these like little like short. I don't know if they're shortcuts. They're just ways that work for a particular person. I always
Yeah.
love to hear about different ones. So this experiential, and I'm sorry, say it again. Experiential what?
Solo intensive is what I like.
Experiential
That's the
soul
name of,
intensive. Yeah.
yeah. It's actually, I mean, the practice of it is called experiential narrative practice. So I run a certification program also through my work at
Oh, neat.
the Astoria Institute, in experiential narrative practice. So we have two certifications there. We do a certification in applied narrative intelligence. So we're talking a lot about this idea of narrative intelligence, which many people haven't heard of yet. But it's like emotional intelligence everyone knows about now, right?
Yeah.
It's just like having the intelligence around knowing that we're all made up of emotions. We have feelings. They have a language to them. They're asking us to do certain things, and it helps us to be aware
Yeah.
of what our emotions are doing. So narrative intelligence is the same, but it's around stories, and it's the capacity to understand and to recognize and shape the stories that are influencing how we live. So we're all telling ourselves stories about who we are, about who other people are, about how the world works. And narrative intelligence is expanding our capacity to recognize those narratives at play and be able to shape them so that we can have some more narrative agency in our lives, to put our hands on the steering wheel and actually shape the stories that are driving us. And so we have a certification program in kind of teaching that narrative intelligence and how to apply it. And then one in experiential narrative practice. So then that's like getting, and applied narrative intelligence is online. It's a 12-week cohort. And then the experiential narrative practice is in person, right? It's a full training live, where you're
Gotcha.
learning the tips and the tools and techniques of experiential, things like floor checks and psychodrama and, spectrograms, and there's a variety of these different tools that were, even like Lego play, of like how do you, listen for metaphor, because so much of experiential
Hmm.
is just about making an image. So I always tell people you don't owe the client a catharsis, you owe them a picture. And so, being able to, and it's the simplest stuff. Like I did a I was running a retreat, for in collaboration with the people I work with at Astoria. So they have a group of solopreneur coaching clients. and like very purpose driven. And so I was just there to add in experiential things where helpful. And we came back from a lunch break, and the guy that I work with, his name's Harris. He walked in. He's like, "Hey, this person, we'll just say it's Steven. I just said, hey, Steven had a lot of stuff come up during lunch, and I need you to help him." And I like look over, and like this person's just standing there sobbing,
Mm.
and I was like, "Oh man, okay." And there's like 30 people there, like ready to get going, and this person is just having this whole experience.
Wow.
And so I had no context whatsoever for what had come up for him. I didn't know if this was a huge trauma trigger. I mean, I knew nothing. And so I just said, okay, like, and everyone's sitting there like watching because they've all been in this cohort together for a couple of years. So I was like, okay, can you just like tell me what's going on? And so he starts talking, and what I'm listening for is anything that is image based, anything that could be a metaphor that I could begin to have him create something experientially. And so I remember one of the first things he said was like, "I'm just so caught in this like loop in my head." And so as soon as he said loop, I was like, great. So I said, great, start walking in a circle. And so I was like, show me what the loop looks like. Show me what the
Mm.
loop sounds like. So he starts
Mm-hmm.
just walking in a circle, and he starts speed walking. Right. And and I'm standing in the center, just kind of tracking him as he's moving around. And he's just word vomiting all this stuff around some stuff in his childhood. And so
Mm.
at one point I was just like, so tell me about the speed that you're walking, right? Just what's going on here? And so that allowed him to like tap into that heat a bit more. And as he started processing it, he naturally started slowing down his pace in this. He was just walking in a circle until eventually he just came to a complete stop. And I was like, great. So now we're ready to move on to the next part of this. And so we created this opportunity for him to speak to his like six-year-old version of himself who had a message that he needed to hear that didn't get heard.
Yeah.
And so we did this little psychodramatic thing. But it's something like that, whereas like instead of just like sitting down in a chair and saying, okay, let's process this together, it's listening for like, what can we make this? How can we visualize this? And as soon as he gave me language of loop, I knew that let his body make the loop, and something will get worked out in the process. And he picked up the pace on his own, and his body just knew, okay, I've worked that out, and it's time to stop, and we can transition to the next thing. And I think that's some of the magic of experiential, is just being able to create in real time.
Well,
Yeah.
you got to be pretty creative yourself to do that. I mean,
Yeah, it's taken a lot of I mean, I still deal with a lot of imposter syndrome around it. I mean, even
yeah.
in that moment, I was just like,
What
I'm
am I
often
gonna?
thinking like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I'm
Yeah.
just kind of thinking like, what's the literal next step that I can take? I don't know how this is going to end yet. And,
Yeah.
um, but there's a lot of, whether it's trust or just a willingness to risk in front of people, of
Yeah.
just, saying like, yeah, I've got to practice some improv. I've got to be willing to create. And I often will talk to people about how I think clarity often comes from action and not from,
Mm-hmm.
thinking. That our tendency for many of us, especially the overthinkers, of which I'm one, is to think like, well, I'm not going to do a thing until I have mapped it out and I know like what's going to happen,
Yeah.
as opposed to thinking like, okay, I'm going to take a step and then I'll see like, okay, what happened when I did that? And say, so, okay, so he's now doing this loop. Okay, this is going okay. Like, instead of needing to know the whole pathway forward, it's just like, do I know enough to know where I'm going to step next? And then I can reevaluate. And so a lot of that has been taking some of the pressure off of myself to think I have to have the whole thing planned out before I take a step. It's like, no, the clarity about what will happen next will come when I do something.
Yeah.
The clarity will arrive from the action step, not from all of the thinking. Now, it's not an invitation to go and be reckless,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it is an encouragement to say, we can stay stuck for a long time thinking the clarity will arrive if we just think hard enough about the issue.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
always think that's true.
Yeah. Are there certain metaphors that you see that persistently or commonly repeat in people's lives, like things that you know?
Mm.
Okay, this is connected to this one of the the four narratives that you had mentioned earlier.
Well, I'd have to think about that, about what patterns keep showing up. I mean, the metaphor that I have found most helpful for people, it's a slightly different
Mm-hmm.
question, but I'll talk about how in Becoming Restoried, that restoring our lives is a lot like a palimpsest. Now, many people are like, "What on earth did you just say?" And so but you will probably know it when I describe it. But in the old days, when they were writing with quill and parchment, you take your feather, your quill, you dip it in some ink, and you write on the parchment. And if you realize that either you messed up or that you don't have enough parchment and you want to change what you wrote, you didn't have the luxury of just taking an eraser or like highlighting the text and hitting delete. So to get rid of the story that you might have written, they had to take an etching tool and they had to scrape off the ink of the old story. And then they could write a new story over the top. However, because it took effort and force to write the first story, there is an imprint that's left on the page.
Mm.
And that's what's referred to as the palimpsest. So the palimpsest is the imprint of the old story on the parchment when there's a new story written on top. And that, for me, has been such an effective metaphor to talk with people about, because partly what I'll tell folks is, we have this, I think it's a false and very unhelpful view of healing, that if we have been living with a self-doubt story, been living with a fierce inner critic, or a story that I'm not worthy, that we think, well, when I'm healed, as if it's ever just a done process, but when I'm healed, like those voices will go away.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we do the therapy, we do the intensives, we do the meditation things, we do the cohorts, whatever. And we're just like, why am I still hearing this voice? And so then we can go into a deep shame spiral or despair, thinking, I haven't made any progress. It's because we're working with the wrong metaphor, I think.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking, oh no, like the work is to scrape off. I don't get to just suddenly believe the news story. I don't just get to, this is why I'm not a big believer in just affirmations as a general thing.
Yeah.
Many people are. But I think, like, if I genuinely hate myself and I stand and look in the mirror and say I'm a good person, it doesn't really matter how many times I say it. I'm not going to believe it.
Yeah.
And partly because, and I'll tell this other short story before coming back to the palimpsest, is I had a therapist that I told her once, I said, if I could just learn to love and trust myself, I think everything in my life would be solved. And she was like, well, do you want to know a secret? I mentioned this at the end of the TEDx talk, actually. And I said, sure. She goes, well, the secret is you already do. And I was like, well, that's completely untrue. You haven't listened to a word I said. What a terrible therapist. She said, no, you do, because everyone is born with a pristine mirror through which to see themselves with love and compassion. The problem is that during the course of our lives, our mirrors get so covered with the muck and debris of shame and pain that happened to us that we can't see the truth of who we are anymore.
Yeah.
And so the task is not to just learn to love and trust yourself. The task is to scrape away everything that's keeping you from seeing that you already do.
Yeah.
And so I think that idea of the scraping has been really helpful for me, and thinking about, like, when I have a story I believe about who I am, that I'm not worthy, it's not as simple as just thinking, I'm just going to tell myself that I am worthy and I'll believe this new story. It's like, no, I have to scrape off the old story, which is a muscular effort. It takes work to scrape off the old story, to realize the lies that it's been telling me. And then I might be able to write a new story, but I don't get to do that with the old story just vanish forever. I'm writing it over the imprint because it left a mark, right? Both the physical writing on the parchment left a mark, and the story that I believed left a mark on me as well. What healing looks like, I think, is the ability to recognize the lie and then tell the truth instead. And so it's the ability to look at the parchment and know what's the old story and what's the new. It's not that the old story has suddenly vanished from the page. It's just that I have learned to recognize the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really useful, for me, it's been very freeing. I actually just had a call right before our recording with someone who was interested in joining Becoming Restored. And I had run a public workshop last week and asked, like, what stuck out to her. She's like, that palimpsest metaphor. She was like, it was so permissive because, I just had been feeling like, why can't I make the progress? And that metaphor gave me this sense of, oh, like, I have made a lot of progress. It's just that the voices don't just vanish. I need to just be able to name, oh, that's a lie. Like, that voice that I'm hearing, that's a lie. That's not actually the truth. I don't necessarily get it. I don't get the luxury of it just vanishing forever.
Yeah.
But my work now is to say, that's not the truth. Here's what the truth is. And then I have to re-narrate the new story that I'm living in.
Yeah. 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 There's as you speak, there was a book, I think his name is Jeffrey Martin, Finders, where he talks about a lot about the narrative self, and just this kind of loop in the brain. And a lot of neuroscientists talk about there is that consciousness that just goes on, and it's just looping and talking. And his idea was that, and I may be saying this incorrectly, but you can diminish that voice to the point where it actually becomes completely quiet, and
Mm,
that story that you're telling yourself in your mind over and over can be quieted, and you can see a new
mm.
story, or you can find inner peace, getting out of that narrative talk that
Yeah.
just goes on and on. uh,
That's the hope, I think. And even with those old parchments, right? Like over time, that the imprint of the old story fades, right? It
yeah,
may be that like we can just make it out if we look hard enough, but
yeah,
it does fade as long as we're not continuing to put ink and pressure in the indents of that old story. Just like if you have tire tracks on an old dirt road and you want to make new tire tracks, it's going to take a lot of work to keep making sure your car is not like going down into the ruts that it knows well, because it's like, well, that's a well-worn pathway, that's a lot
yeah,
easier.
yeah, that
But
it
every
knows
time we
exactly.
drive through those tire tracks again, it just makes it harder for us to make new ones.
Yeah,
So it's like, yeah, I think eventually we are able to, those negative voices, the old story can get quieter and quieter, and potentially even to the point that it's more or less gone. um, but I also think like that it's so much muscular, intentional effort of reorienting ourselves away from the the real temptation of those voices, because it's like, hey, things are, this pathway over here, just go this way. Like you're making it harder for yourself,
yeah.
and so it's a lot of commitment.
Yeah. No, I would say that I'm a testament and a believer that is possible. I mean, I've lived it, and for me it was, like I had said before, it was about anxiety, and I thought that I would never live without it. That this would, but that narrative entered my life as an adult. So I was probably
Mm,
28, 29 years old when that just kind of struck. See, it felt like it struck out of the blue, like lightning struck me, and
mm,
I was suddenly different. And then spent 10 years like that. And then finally, and at 10 years, you think, okay, well, this is my life now. And I think some people do. And I think some people, will
sure.
continue to live like that. But I had found my way out. But I had to try so many different things to find my way out.
Mm,
And finally, I found my own path. Um, and then for a long time, you talk about the ruts in the road and the story. When I would be exposed to those scenarios, at first I was like, oh wow, I can talk to my partner normally. This is amazing. And then it was like, oh wow, I can talk to my brother and my dad and my mom normally.
mm,
This is amazing. And then it kind of, I noticed it kind of crept out into, my friends, and then my community, and then professionally, and all of that. But it does take time, and it did take work, and it took working in a way that also worked for me. And just
yeah.
figuring out what that is. Because and that's why I'm so excited to talk to so many different people here, because it's to try and share all of these different avenues, look at these different avenues, be willing to explore them, work with them, because there is a rich human experience that is possible, and we're all deserving of that. So
It makes me also think of the metaphor of the Tibetan singing bowl. I keep one here on my, on my desk,
yeah,
and I don't know. Tell me if you can actually hear this sound.
yeah,
Is that coming through?
yeah,
Okay. So the metaphor I'll often use is like, if you take the singing bowl and you give it a strike, it makes this really lovely resonant sound, and then after a few seconds, it's gone, right? But if we strike it and you begin to circle it. I don't know if that sound is coming through on the mic, um, but the more that you circle it, the louder the sound gets, the more resonant the sound gets, the wider it stretches, right? The deeper it goes. Um, and that this is the way, like, that tending to the stories of our lives, or our healing also works. Is like we can do the single intervention. You can go to therapy for a little bit. You can do the retreat. You can do the intensive, and there's something useful that happens. But over time, a lot of the benefit of that can begin to fade, if we're not circling the bowl. And it's like we have to keep
Yeah.
coming back to them, right? It's fidelity to the stories. It's fidelity to our own growth of continuing to come back and circle again, see what we might have missed. The self curiosity I talked about in the TEDx talk, is that if we really want the resonance, if we want the depth and to the expansion to happen, then it's not a one time engagement. We
Yeah.
keep finding new ways to circle the bowl.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. When you get to a certain point, right? Let's just say they've somebody's overcome that point where you feel like you've overcome,
Mm.
and then some people talk about being an onion peel, but there gets a point where, and certainly for me, where okay, look, I'm done talking about my stuff now, but I still want to continue working on myself. I want to still continue to
Yeah.
grow. Where do you guide people that reach that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is in the pursuit of what they've come to understand as something that gives them purpose.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of the excavation that happens in dealing with the pain, and then hopefully in doing so, there's a revelation around what might be deeply purposeful for them. I'm not one. I'm not a particular believer. I know many are, so I'm not uh, pointing a finger at this, but I'm not a big believer in the sense that our purpose is assigned to us from outside, whether that
Hmm.
is from God or the universe. I think purpose is something that is often created from the experiences of our lives,
Hmm.
and at least in my experience and the people I work with, often stems from desire to heal the thing within us that's needed healing.
Yeah.
And so I think like I've done so much deep work in my own story and still do therapy. I still do retreats, because I really also enjoy and love those things. Like self excavation is an
Yeah.
enjoyable, difficult, but an enjoyable process to me. I want to understand myself. One, because it's just people are interesting and I think I'm interesting. So like understanding my story is curious to me, and also because I'm very interested in doing as little harm in the world as I can and as much good as I can. And I think I am far more likely to reduce my harm in the world when I have a deeper and more compassionate understanding of myself. So I have that longing. uh, but then I also, a lot of how I continue to circle the singing bowl for me is in doing purposeful work, like in becoming restored or in teaching experiential work or in writing. Is that in the offering of in the redistribution, right? In the Bible, there's like the 50 years of Jubilee. It's like redistribute all the land and all the resources, like give it all back. And it's like it's that kind of thing. It's trying to live from a Jubilee um perspective, like everything that comes in. It's like how do I give this wisdom back, this knowledge, this experience, share the goodness of stories. So that for me has been really useful. It's like actually taking action on a sense of purpose. um and so I think for clients, there's an orientation toward that of saying like, yeah, great. So let's go pursue your purpose, and that's going to get tended because every time I'm helping someone with something in their story, there's always a parallel process happening for me. As for any therapist or practitioner,
Hmm.
it's like something comes up for a client, you're helping to
Yeah.
work on something. Something is also getting worked out in you, and so there's some of that going on. But I think it's also like about it's so different for different people because some of what is needed is like there's some folks I've worked with who have never really given themselves to just pursue their passions. There's like, well, what's the return on the investment there? Like how is that gonna like what kind of money is that gonna bring in? Like is that and it's just like what if you just pursued something because it brought joy? And like I've done that with people where I'll just make lists of like what are the things that you just absolutely love. Like if you were able to bring your 7-year old self into the future with you today and you had like 2 days to spend with that version of yourself, like what would you do like to make that kid happy? Because the odds are like those same things will probably still make you happy. And so like having like little inner child dates can be really great. And so it's a lot of like when people have worked with me, there's an orientation to like what's the quality of your connection to each of the like we've done a lot of work on tending to your pathway of connection to yourself. So then also like let's look at what's it like with your relationships, how connected are you to the place that you live, to the earth, and how connect you to something greater than yourself. I think that's been really useful for folks to get that orientation.
Yeah, that's wonderful, man. Yeah, you're doing
Yeah.
wonderful work. I'm gonna have to become
Thanks. Yeah.
a client. I'm gonna have to come over to you guys and get some
Yeah,
education.
it'd be great. Yeah, well, I'm starting to do some more public retreats again. I have a book coming out in October called The Wild Way,
Oh
Navigating
wow,
the Space
yeah,
Between the Old Story and the New. And so I'll be doing a retreat called The Wild Way at the beginning of November.
yeah,
So I'm
neat.
sure people, if anyone's interested, they can find out the information on my website. It'll be up there soon.
We'd be happy to talk about that when it's time. So,
Yeah, I'm excited about that one. It's well, on one level, like basically how the book came about was I went through 3 years of notes from coaching calls,
oh
of
wow,
workshops and things that I've done of thinking through like what's the stuff that I've said that really seems to have struck a chord with people that's landed. And so I
yeah,
compiled like a list of like 100 of the things that I felt like were most resonant, and then I turn those into kind of like short little mini chapters. Sometimes they're like sometimes the little mini, I call them dispatches. Sometimes the dispatch is a paragraph, sometimes it's 3 pages, sometimes it's a single sentence. So practically it was like here's the stuff that really seems to have landed. But I went with the title of The Wild Way for two reasons. One, there's a amazing English myth teller named Martin Shaw who talks about myth as a wild way for telling the truth. And I
mm,
love that as a description of myth, and also just really for story, this wild way of telling the truth. And I've thought a lot about the idea of wildness, and feeling like a lot of like my innate wildness in a very good and expansive way was exiled at a young age and was
yeah,
severed. You know, I had it severed from me, and it's like this desire to reclaim that. There's many old folk tales that have this notion of the wild twin, that we're kind of born with these
huh,
wild twins that get exiled from us, and that we spend our lives trying to find a way like to reconnect to the wild twin, like that we're not fully ourselves in the domesticity of the castle nor out
yeah,
in the dark forest, that we have to reunite these. Um, and so thinking about how in fairy tales especially, like there's always a dark forest. It's the place where the
yes,
shape shifting happens. You know,
right,
the real change happens in the disorientation of not where you were and not really where you're going, but in that middle threshold, right? The hero's journey archetype, many might
yeah,
know, is, you know, you start in the known world and then there's a severance that happens from the known, and you get kind of catapulted into this threshold, into the messy middle. And
yeah,
then there's a
right,
return that happens. And so this book is a kind of a reflection of dispatches for me from that in between, the liminal space of not the old story and not yet the new story, but this in the
yes,
dark forest where the shape shifting happens. And what are the things that I have found clients find most helpful to hear when they've been there?
that's
So yeah,
remarkable.
and I tell
Yeah,
I tell three there's 4 parts to the book. Each one starts with an old story. So I tell the Lindworm and the Handless Maiden that I mentioned before. I tell another story called The Half Girl, and then I wrote an original kind of folk tale called The Boy in the Wolf Mirror.
neat.
So I've got that in there too. So each section will start with an old story and then these series of dispatches. I'm pumped about it. I think it's going to be good. I can't wait for it to be out.
Yeah, that's incredible. So October, that comes out in October.
Yeah, October 21st it'll be out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious. So I've been looking at. We're creating a new documentary about beauty and the soul from Piero Ferrucci, and
Mm,
but we've been experimenting with the hero's journey and really all of our storytelling. Um, and I was doing some research, and there's kind of a similar storytelling format that's more of along the lines of the spiritual journey, the spirit's journey, in
mm,
which I think it's Carolyn Meese talks about this a little bit in different books and archetypes that kind of come forward in it. But instead of the there's the descent. You something happens to you, or there's an inner longing, existential crisis. Along the lines of the spiritual journey, and then there's the actual journey that you were talking about, going out into the wild and going out into the forest. But then when you go into the cave and you have to meet with this, I always like I always imagine like I'm playing a Super Mario game.
Exactly. The
Yeah,
ultimate boss.
the ultimate boss, and you have to meet the ultimate boss, and you have to defeat him. But
Yeah.
instead of defeating him, you befriend them because they're
Yeah.
you, and they're a direct representation of you. And I was like, that's incredible. So we've been playing around with the idea that that the actual protagonist of the film will actually be spirit itself or the soul,
Mm.
and we're going to tell it through all these different individuals. But just the the idea of the hero's journey, it so seems to be rooted in our DNA. Like it's just it seems to be like a part of life. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but then to put it in stories and to add metaphors and being able to get a tangible way to perceive it outside of your own experience uh, it's just so it's so important to me. I think it's so important to do that because it lets us just see it
Hmm.
in like a different way. Like you can just, oh, that's what I'm experiencing. Oh, that's what I'm going
Totally.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So I mean, there's I had a conversation on my podcast a few weeks ago with a guy named Ben Rogers from Boston College who did some research around the hero's journey and basically was showing that people who were able to understand their life through the lens of the hero's journey archetype had a higher resilience. They showed less anxiety, a greater sense of kind of peace and contentment. That there was a direct parallel to, like, if you had a low ability, I would call it like a low in narrative intelligence around understanding how your story, how your life is a story unfolding. Then you tended to have higher anxiety and like less resiliency.
yeah,
But then and so it validated a lot of the work that I had been doing, because it's like I kept
yeah,
finding, it's like not that I was explicitly guiding people through the hero's journey archetype itself, but I was guiding people through old stories that are that follow that, because it was Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth for a reason. He kept
yeah,
seeing it show up in all these
right,
different cultures,
right,
and that there's some, and that at the very least the thing in most stories is like severance, threshold, return. That there is life as we know it, something about it gets changed. Margaret Atwood, the novelist, calls a story a pattern interrupted, which
mm-hmm,
is amazing.
mm-hmm.
So it's just like there's a pattern to life. Something gets interrupted, something is severed. Now there's a middle, like there's a threshold where something's changing, and then there's a return in some way. Sometimes that's literally back to Simba goes back to Pride Rock, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
there's literally
yeah,
a return,
right,
or there's some kind of return to ourselves, that we've kind of moved outside of the edges of ourselves, and there's a return back to ourselves in some way, and that something's different. And that's always the question that story is asking, is like what's different.
yeah,
And because if nothing has changed, we really don't have a story. Like, story is all about narrating change, and so I think the hero's journey allows that, like, it plays that out in such a powerful way of just
yeah,
knowing that there's something that's pulling us, right? There's something that's driving us. That the story, I often will talk about story, is a conversation between desire and constraint. There's always something the protagonist wants that they don't have, because if they didn't want anything, there'd be no story to tell. You just have a description of reality. So it's like there's a desire for something, but then there's a reason they don't have it, and it's that constraint. Like, what is the thing they want, and why don't they have it? What's standing in their way? And the story is the narration of their attempts to get past the restraints and the constraints. And most of these old stories are asking three primary questions. One is, what is it that I love, or what is it that I really, really want? The second is, what does that thing cost? And the
yeah,
third is, what price am I willing to pay to get it? And I think those are really useful questions for life, right? What is it that we love? What does that cost? And what price are we willing to pay?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I never think about the last two.
Yeah.
And you have to. You need to start thinking about that.
Got to.
Otherwise, you
Yeah.
find yourself in funny places. You're like, oh, I don't belong here.
Totally.
Yeah,
Even the things that we want the most that are genuinely good, they all have a cost to them, right?
yeah,
And it's just asking what price we're willing to pay for it.
yeah,
Even at a simple level, if you choose to get married, it's just like, well, there's a cost to that. It means
yeah,
that there are other people that I won't date. There are other romantic
yeah,
pursuits I won't have, or
yeah.
I might have lived in this place, but now because I've married this person and their family is here, I'm going to live in this. It's just like, there's always a cost.
Right,
And
right.
it's just asking, like, what is the cost, and am I willing to pay that price?
Yeah,
And sometimes it's an easy yes, sometimes it's an obvious no, and sometimes it requires wrestling.
yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Michael, we're probably almost out of time, so I just wanted to thank you. We'd love to talk to you again when your book comes out.
Sure. Would love
And
that.
yeah, like I said, you probably have a new student, and we can get some education
Be
from you
amazing.
guys.
Yeah.
And just thanks for your time.
Of course, Stephen. It's a pleasure. I look forward to coming back. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the L36 podcast, where global adventures, transformative stories, and cultural insights come together, expanding our perspectives and inspiring us to grow. Today's powerful conversation with Michael McRay highlighted the profound potential of storytelling as a healing tool. When we approach our stories with curiosity and compassion, we gain the power to rewrite limiting narratives, enhance emotional clarity, and cultivate deeper connections with ourselves and the world. Remember, your story holds the power to transform not only your own life, but also the lives of those around you. If this conversation resonated deeply with you, we'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and leave a review. These dialogues are just the beginning. To dive deeper into today's insights, visit us at l36.io. Until next time, keep exploring, and we'll see you soon on the L36 podcast.